Hi everyone, thank you so much for coming to on PhpSpec and Not-the-Drupal Way. I looked at my competition for this slot, and it was pretty heavy. This was tough competition. I'm up against Angie Byron with her hot off the presses usability testing that everyone's excited about, and the teaching kids how to code. You heartless people, you're not interested in that? But I am going to prove to you that you made the smart decision and are clearly the smartest people who came to this conference. So I've remembered all of your faces now. I know these are the people. This is where it's at. These are the smart ones. So we've bonded for life now. On PhpSpec and Not-the-Drupal Way, hopefully that is not clear enough of a title so that you are able to project all of your hopes and dreams onto it so that I can disappoint you. I'm Michelle Krejci. I work for a company called Palantir. I'll talk about that in a second. I would like to offer a counter-narrative about how I became a developer, counter to what Angie talked about this morning. Because I can tell you for sure my parents did not own a computer until I was 13. I wasn't Fortraning. I was running through the woods and LARPing. We didn't call it LARPing, we called it make-believe back then, but I have a liberal arts degree. I am so liberal artsy. I went to graduate school in England for it, so I have all my liberal arts cred, and I did not touch the command line until 3 years ago when I became a developer and I started testing. And that's what got me into testing, that's what got me into development. So I know that what I'm talking about here, I'm talking about a lot of, I might mention things that seem really far off. Maybe you're not virtualized yet, maybe you don't have a vagrant environment, you're not using Composer, some command line stuff, some technical stuff that might seem really far off, and I'm offering you this narrative to tell you that there is a way in. I'd like to help you get into this if this seems far off to you, but I didn't know any command line anything 3 years ago, and I'm doing this stuff, so I'm really passionate and very interested in helping other people find a path forward through this. So please, if there's anything here that seems like I don't even know how to get to that, please come and talk to me, because I have failed a lot, and I'm happy to help. So I'm from here. I'm from Minnesota. I went to Crete-and-Durham. I worked at the State Fair for 5 years, oven fresh brownies all the way. So I'm really happy to be here, and I hope that me telling you this helps to earn your trust, and I have more legitimacy, more credibility with you. I hope that tells you what a smart developer I am. This is the company I work for, so if being from Minnesota doesn't give me any credibility with you, hopefully working with these smart people gives me some credibility. These are the people I work with. They're pretty serious developers, as you can tell, very academic, very smart people, so I can roll with these guys, and I can roll with this company. So hopefully this will help earn any trust. And you don't even have to listen to me. All of my code is up online. I don't know why I got the blog. So that's not actually a blog. The slides-phpspec.herokuapp.com. All of my slides are up there. I'm going to show you video of me walking through and doing PhpSpec. There's a lot of code on there. I'm going to go through it kind of fast, but if this interests you in any way, or if you just want to kind of go through this presentation all by yourself without having to listen to me talk, you can go and check that out. I have some tutorials on Krejci.io, and my code is on Krejci. There's a module called Adonis, Drupal Adonis, and that is a Drupal installation with a vagrant file that has all the code that I'm talking about on it. And then finally, if you want to follow my stream of consciousness, my Twitter handle is @devmishev, and my Pebble is connected to my Twitter account, so I will be able to feel if anyone's tweeting while I'm talking, and this feeds me in so many ways. Essentially, my ego is in your Twitter account. So I'll be very, yeah, I'll get physical feedback about how boring or not I am. So, or I'll wonder, are you shit talking? It'll be so exciting to find out later. Here's the agenda. First of all, I'm going to talk about the types of testing. Particularly 3 types of testing. And then I want to emphasize for you the superiority of unit testing. And then we are going to discuss why PhpSpec is my favorite unit testing. Spoiler alert, behavior-driven development. And then I will do a demo. Don't worry, I have pre-recorded the demo, so I will be explaining what I'm doing while you're seeing the demo. So I'm not going to mess that up. I can't. And then finally, we're going to talk about why you should test, but more in a hand-wringing, navel-gazing, why it sometimes sucks to be a Drupal developer kind of way. That was hopefully a teaser. Okay, so let's say for our purposes that there are only 3 kinds of testing. And I know that, and again, I'd like to applaud you for coming to this talk to begin with, because I avoid testing talks like the plague because they just make me feel bad about myself. They just make me feel guilty. So thank you so much for coming to this. I hope it doesn't feel like I'm berating you, but I totally am berating you. You should be writing a ton of tests. So thank you for allowing that place in your heart. But there's a lot of words out there, so I'd like to sort of break this down a little bit. For our purposes, there's the unit test. Who's heard of unit tests before? Right, everyone. Who knows that unit test is like the holy grail and we all should be worshiping the unit test, and the unit test is the thing that's going to save us from all of our problems, but no one writes unit tests. I mean, it's getting better, but we all know we should, and we know that we should be writing it because a unit test is so small, it's testing the expected output given a set of inputs. It's so small that when it fails, it can be only one reason. And so our fantasy about the kind of software we want to build is that when anything goes wrong, we know exactly what caused it. We can find that function, we can isolate it, we can run tests to make sure that the code still does everything we want to do, and we can move on. Imagine if Drupal 8 was built this way. It would be a paradise. This is what a unit test looks like. This is actually PhpSpec code. This is very small. It says it checks for swear words in titles. We'll get to this in a second. But it's putting in some input and it's testing the expected output. That is a unit test. And then there are integration tests. Integration tests would be the next level of testing. So at this point, we are testing the interface between components. So we've built a component with unit testing. We've tested the input-output level. But these inputs are conceivably coming from another source. So let's say you're writing a commerce application, so it's going to handle billing. You can write a bunch of unit tests to make sure that you have all of the billing correctly. Given this set of inputs, you can give it this set of outputs. But the fact is, you're probably getting those inputs from another system that you're not able to touch. It's pulling that content in from another site. So putting those 2 things next to each other would be an integration test to see if your component works with another person's component, given their sets of inputs. So when that fails, you know that handoffs aren't working. You already have tested your stuff. You know that given this input, you can get the expected output. But when it fails, that means you're not getting your input that you expected, or you're not giving out the output you expected. I strongly believe that there are no integration tests for Drupal. I've never seen them written. No one's ever convinced me that they've ever written an integration test. The reason why is that Drupal itself is an application. It is already an entire system. It's so many integration tests. I've never seen anyone write integration within Drupal. So the only thing you're really integrating with is Drupal itself, which is a system. So if you're testing that your code works with Drupal, that's not an integration test. That's a system test. Which leads me to our last test, the most popular test, the system test. The system test is probably the test that everyone is doing something for right now. You probably are doing system tests, even if it's manual, even if it's going on, walking through some user story, walking through some ticket you've written, having someone point and click, walk through your site, you're doing a system test. You're just checking that everything works together, that all the pieces are working together. And when a system test fails, it could be any number of reasons. All you can know from a system test is something went wrong somewhere. So let me give you an example of that. This is a BHAT step definition. A lot of you were here for the BHAT test. So this is a step definition. Again, my code's online. I know this is a little fuzzy. But what this test is doing is that it's asserting that the image is present. So it's taking the DOM, it's going to a page, taking the entire DOM, searching for just the image tags on the DOM, and looking to see if a specific image passed as a parameter is present. Going to a page, is there any image called this on the page? Nope, it throws you an error. I did not find that image. Well, how many ways are there to add an image to a Drupal page? And how many layers of Drupal does that image test, or does that image touch to give you that image? At that point, it could be a view, it's the database, it's the editor page. So all you know is that the image didn't appear, but it doesn't tell you anything about where that thing went wrong. That's system test. You can hear my bias for unit tests in my description of these kinds of testing, obviously. The superiority of unit tests is when that fails, you know exactly why it failed. That is awesome. However, so this is the ideal. I'm not alone in believing this. I mean, you don't have to read far into testing to understand that this is a thing. This would be the ideal. So this is from the book, Succeeding with Agile, Software Development Using Scrum, probably all words you've heard. And unit tests should be your base. Everything should have unit tests. You build your components, they all have unit tests. You integrate with them, you write the integration tests to make sure those components work together. And then you essentially write just a little bit of, this is like a food pyramid, just a smattering of sugary sweets at the top, just to make sure that the whole system fired as you expected. You're just asking, did you do what I expected? However, in the Drupal world, this is, really, this is what it looks like. Again, I don't think there's any integration tests for Drupal. It's just a ton of system tests, and this is being super generous here, like super, super generous with the unit testing. I mean, it's probably just like a little bit of olive oil, at the bottom there. There's a ton of system tests, and those system tests, Selenium was really hot a couple years ago. Everyone was writing in Celanese and pointing and clicking around. Now it's BHAT. That's the new hot thing. Casper and Phantom.js, you can actually write crawlers to in Phantom or Casper. They're also drivers, or just manual testing. You just have a group of people who walk through, point and click, walk through your test, walk through your site, make sure everything is there. For unit tests, your options are PhpSpec and PhpUnit. That's your options for writing unit tests, really. I'll just say briefly that I didn't put simple test on this because simple test is a ugly baby of a thing. So it's supposed to be a unit test, but in fact it's a system test because it bootstraps everything. So it really is a system test, even though it wants to be a unit test. But you can't isolate a function, you have to bootstrap the whole thing. And that's not simple test's fault, that's Drupal's fault. And that's why it's still around, because it's really hard to decouple Drupal well enough that you can test at the unit level. When companies are looking at adding tests, and it doesn't take long, I mean, you fail for a long time, and then you either go out of business or decide to test. That's really the the life of a Drupal developer. So if you're still here, presumably you haven't gone out of business yet. So you're testing. You have to test. And the reason why system tests are so ubiquitous is because they're so cheap to add. They're the cheapest, easiest thing to add. So what you're looking at here is you see greenfield and you see brownfield. Those are two different researchers who have done tests about the cost of adding tests for organizations, and they've come to two different conclusions about about unit tests. So in Greenfield study, they found that unit tests were cheap to add and cheap to maintain. In Brownfield study, they found that unit tests were very expensive to add, but cheap to maintain. They both agree that system tests are very cheap to add and very expensive to maintain. So I think that the 2 points here are that system tests are very cheap to add. They are the lowest hanging fruit. Definitely, if you are not doing any testing, do the system testing and start automating that little by little, adding BHAT tests. That's your low-hanging fruit. System tests are very cheap to add, but they're very, very costly to maintain. If you're a full developer, if you're looking at supporting any of these clients, pay yourself later by starting to write some unit tests, because they're the cheapest to maintain. System tests are really expensive to maintain. This is another way of saying essentially what I just said, which is how the resistance of adding testing is really heavy, and it's really easy to add system tests, but much, much easier to maintain unit tests over system tests. Okay, so hopefully I've convinced you that unit tests are a thing, and a thing that we should maybe try to figure out how to do more of. So now I'd like to try to sell you on behavior-driven unit testing, which is what PhpSpec is. Now, PhpSpec is a little bit different in that you might not have heard of it. Who's heard of PhpSpec before they read my thing? You have? A couple people? And in what context have you heard about PhpSpec?
I heard you talk about it.
Okay, I talked about that. Just in the internet. How did you hear about it, Steve?
Both from previous presentations you've done, and it's now available as a modeling framework.
Okay. Yeah. All right. You might be confusing PhpSpec with Prophecy. The Prophecy objects allow you to mock things, so I can go into that in a second, and that's also available for PHP Unit. So if you like PhpSpec because of Prophecy, I lost. So it's available in PHP Unit, but a lot of people hear about PhpSpec from BHAT. So the popularity of BHAT, that's a behavior-driven system test, has brought them into PhpSpec. So it's worth just talking about behavior-driven development here for a moment, or BDD as the cool kids call it. So why is behavior-driven development so awesome? And it really is. Behavior-driven development does feel like you are traveling on a journey with a safe and kind friend who will make sure that you get to your destination. I have drawn a picture for you. This is a client. And this client has an idea of a shippable product. They have in their head this concept of something they would like to share with the world. And they go to you or an agency, or they go to someone and they sort of start to try to describe what is in the box. And if they're reasonably assured that you know what that thing is in the box that they have in their head, you give them a pipeline, a conveyor belt, hopefully automated with Vagrant or Docker, or just some way to ship this stuff. You give them a Drupal shell, you throw a developer on there, you give the developer some tools, and the client has got this pipeline now to give them their product. And maybe, because what's really important is making sure that what's in the box is what's in their head, you add another developer down the pipeline a little bit further that sort of verifies that what was added upstream is in fact that's going to work, that looks good. You know, you want to have some verification there before you ship the box. Maybe you want to automate it. You know, replace that developer with Travis or Circle CI and some automation tools like, you know, write your Behat tests. But can anyone see the problem here? Or what the problem is? I'll tell you what the problem is, because this is in the classroom. Sorry. The problem is that this guy is the only one who knows what's in the box. He's the only one. This person, this client who came to you in the first place, is the only one that can tell us if we've done our job. They're the only one in the entire chain. So getting that person's language and making sure that you capture what that thing is supposed to be in the pipeline up front is really important. We have failed a lot, not because our product was faulty, but because we did not do enough to divine what it was that the client had in their head. So one of the ways that behavior-driven development gets through this is through something called ubiquitous language, which made no sense to me when I first heard ubiquitous language, but I have to say that phrase so that you know I'm legit, and I've read about behavior-driven development. But really, Todd said it best when he said language is everything. And that's really the core of behavior-driven development, that writing tests that use the language of the client really changes fundamentally the product that you build. If you are writing tests that are using the language that the client speaks about the product, you will be closer to actually building the thing that is in the client's brain. I'm going to show you what that means so that that's very clear. The process of behavior-driven development is that you define the requirements in the language that the client has told you what the requirements are, and make those the test. The requirements are the tests. The requirements are what you give yourself through the pipeline to verify that what's going in the box is what's supposed to be in the box according to the client. All right, here's my demo. Hopefully this will work. I have a really dark command line, but again, this is online. So let me just set this up for you, what I'm about to show you. So there's three parts to this. What I'm about to show you is I'm essentially walking you through an entire process of how I do behavior-driven development using Behat and using PhpSpec. So in this example, all of the lights. This is so interesting and cozy. In this example, we're imagining that we have a requirement from a client who does not want certain words to appear in the title of their articles. So they have some concerns for the content editors. They don't want content editors to use certain words. So we're writing a validator that's just going to make sure that those words do not appear in the titles of their content. And so in this first demo, what I'm going to show you is us defining with a system test, with a Behat test, what that requirement is. So we're going to write it in the words of the client as we imagined it.
Wait, what are we about to do?
So I'm going to write a system test that describes in the words of a client what that requirement is. So something along the lines of, we don't want the bad words in the thing. So I'm going to try to define that for you. And what you're going to look at here is, just to orientate you, over here, I'm in code land. Over here, I'm in running the test land. So, and this is true for all of my examples. This is where I run my tests. This is where I write my code. It's just inside the virtual machine, outside the virtual machine. That's all that is. And at first, I'm going to show you a test to make sure that I have installed Drupal properly. So I'll just show you what that Behat test looks like. And then we're going to define what that requirement is. I think I've sufficiently set that up. But don't worry, I'm not going to leave you with this video. I could do that maybe. All right, so here we are. I'm opening up this test. This is a verify that the site and its variables are installed. And given I'm on the home page, I should see that it's there. You can see that it passed. I just made sure that I had properly installed it. Look, it's there, and I can log in. All right, it didn't lie to me. All right, so that's my first test. Now we're going to write our own test that describes what the client wants. So we're going to write, this is a behat test. We're going to write the feature. This is non-executable. This is just a description of what the requirement is in the words of the client. As an editor, I want to be warned when I put a swear word in the title so that I can maintain my site's brand. That is what the client has told you. So you're going to write some acceptance criteria. Okay, well, given I'm logged in as an editor or an administrator with admin permissions, and I am at the node edit page. So, and I'm looking at the ability to edit my node. Then, let's say that we have to give it some parameters, right? Let's say IE6 is a swear word. We're going to make sure that that's a thing. So the acceptance criteria would be when I fill in title with IE6 and I press save, is that thing, I should be warned. I don't want that to happen, right?
Wait, so the background is the acceptance criteria. And what's the scenario?
It's more acceptance criteria.
Oh, okay.
Yep, this is very beheading. And you can see that it fails. It would, right? Because I'm just defining the requirement. I expect that would fail because I haven't written any code yet. All right, so this is where the usefulness of behat ends. This is what a system test is. You can define a requirement, and then you can be like, well, that thing isn't done yet. But it doesn't tell you what to do next in terms of writing code. So its usefulness is over to us. Exit full screen. Okay. So now we get to PhpSpec. Now PhpSpec uses a really similar process, but now we are going to describe what the system needs to do at the function level. Function level. Hopefully I don't lose you there. So here we're going to using a spec, we're going to define how we plan to meet those requirements. Again, just to orientate you. Got it. Too many reminders. Testing land, writing code land. I also will be splitting my screen up over here on the right I'm going to split this into 2 screens using Tmux. None of this is important, by the way. The process is important. Don't worry about the code. All right, so over here, I was learning how to use this while I was making this. So over here, I'm just using PhpSpec. I'm defining a specification. So I'm going to write something called title validator. I need that. And writing title validator, I'm going to stop this for a second. So what I just did was I ran PhpSpec. I said, I would like to create a title validator. And it said, oh, well, you don't have that thing. Would you like me to create it for you? Yes, in fact, I would. I'm a pretty lazy developer. Please do that for me. So it created the class for me. This is straight out of PhpSpec. It made me a class. It knows that I should have a class, that I need some names, some namespace, and my one spec is that that thing exists. So it gave me a test already that my one requirement of this class is that it exists. So now, when I write this class that it created for me, or this test, it'll say, oh, well, actually, it doesn't exist yet. Do you want me to make that for you? In fact, I do want you to make it for me. So I'm going to open it up underneath here. This class that it created for me. So up top, that's the spec. This is the class it created for me, the actual executable code. Create a little class. So now let's write some more specifications. Well, and you write it in language. That makes sense. Well, it should define swears. It should define what a swear word is. And I would imagine that in order to define what swear words are, I would need a function like get swears, and that should return IE6. We know that IE6 is a swear word. So we run that test. It says, well, cool, you don't have get swears, so it created it for me. And get swears should return IE6, but it has not. So I'm opening up my code. It's created get swears for me. And now I'm just going to return, and this is really important, I'm only going to return the bare minimum of what I need, which is IE6. So let me just emphasize what I just said there. So using PhpSpec, I'm describing the language. These are the things it needs. It should define swears. notices that I don't have that yet, creates that getSwears function for me. It expects that getSwears would return IE6, and what I did was meet the bare minimum of my test. It noticed that getSwears is supposed to return IE6, so I'm just creating a function that returns IE6. The reason why I'm emphasizing this is test-driven development means that you only write the bare minimum code to pass your test. If your code needs to be more complex, if it needs to return something more complicated than a string, that means you need to write better tests. You write a better test that can find what you actually are looking for, not fake it by writing some, piddly code that returns the bare minimum. Okay, so now I'm rolling. That passed, looking good. I feel like I'm passing this game, which is the best part. It just feel like you're playing a game. All right, so now I need to check for the swears in the titles. I've moved on. I'll make them more complicated later. So it should check for the swears in the titles. So I know that it should throw an exception during when it gets past the string IE6. So if I pass it a IE6 string, it should give me an exception. So I created this function, same means, check clean, argument. It's going to return an exception. Again, bare minimum. Run that passes, and I pause the recording. Nice. Probably have edited that better. All right, so at this point in my process, you can see what I'm doing here. I've over here on the left, over here in testing world, I'm describing a test that I want to write. It generates everything it can for me. It helps me as much as it possibly can. I am defining in greater and greater detail what it is that I am doing in language that a developer should be able to look at. This is his own documentation. I'm describing what this thing is. And then I'm writing code to pass the bare minimum of what I'm describing. And I'm running tests over and over. This is not a build some code all day long and then at 4 o'clock before you leave, you run the tests and then you're like, oh, I guess that's something that I'll have to do tomorrow. This is part of the process. All right, so now I'm going to skip ahead a little bit because you can see me iterating over writing tests, getting code, writing tests, getting code. So now I've kind of built this out a little bit more. First of all, I've defined more than one swear word. You could see that this would be an opportunity to talk to the client. So what do you consider swear words? So this client considers IE6, WordPress, and PHP 5.2 a swear word. So I would expect that I get all of those things when I get swears. The getSwears has a should have value, and I've explained to PhpSpec what have value means, like how to get have value. So I'm highlighting this here because when you write Drupal code, you need to loop through arrays. So you often need to tell, if you're using PhpSpec with Drupal, like I do, I often need to explain what it means to loop through an array to PhpSpec. So the important thing to remember here is if you choose to go with PhpSpec, you should take a look at get matchers, because you will be looping through a lot of arrays, and you'll need to tell PhpSpec how to do that. So it gets those swear words, and now I've given it a lot more case studies. So I've written smarter and smarter specs. I've written smarter and smarter, more and more specific tests. You can see, for instance, that I have whole sentences as titles, as opposed to one-word strings. That means my test had to get smarter to be able to catch the exceptions for this. I've also written in all caps, because I want to be able to catch lowercase and capitalizations. And I've written positive and negative examples. So I should I should see an exception for these 5 things at the top, but I should not see an exception if the title was test your shit. That's okay. All right, so from the code that I just showed you, that's Spec. We'll say that Spec has fully define what the functionality I'm looking for. This is the code that results from that. This is the class that has been generated from that iteration cycle. So it's pretty simple. I'm taking the title, I'm making it lowercase, I'm exploding the title part, so I get all the parts of the title and looping through, seeing if it's in my get swears, and it's throwing me an exception if it found that swear word. So how do we Drupal with this? Now we have a class. This isn't Drupal. That's not, Drupal doesn't do classes like that. So what do you do now? You have this class sitting in a source directory. That's not Drupal at all, in a source directory. Well, we're going to use a .module file for the only thing that it should be used to do, which is to get the input that you need to execute your code, which of course is a hook. So we know that we need to, I'm going to hook into the form alter system, and I'm writing a validation invoke. So this is the only Drupal code I've written, the .module. So within my validator, I'm instantiating that class that I created. I'm instantiating that title validator class. So all the validation does is, okay, well, once you hit validation, I want you to instantiate a class. I want you to pass the title through the class, and I want you to catch the exception and make it a Drupal exception now. Because Drupal doesn't throw exceptions, it throws form errors. So I had to translate exception into Drupal language. All right, so let's see it all together. Now, what I'm going to show you all together. This is my process. So I use PhpSpec to define just the functionality that I'm building out. I use PhpSpec. I mock any inputs that I need. But it puts it in a source directory. So as soon as I have defined and built out the functionality that I need for Drupal, this is my integration test, which again, I don't think is a true thing, but my integration test is symlinking that class from my spec into my module, so it's connected to the module, and running that system test again. So what you're going to see me do is symlink that class into my Drupal module, make sure that my spec works, so that's my unit test, and then write that, remember that system test I wrote at the top to validate if I get an error when I pass it IE6 in the title. So it walks through as an editor, logs in, creates a title, saves it. I'm going to run that, and that's my integration test. Does my code work with Drupal? So let's see what that looks like. Okay. So I've listed, I wanted to show you that I have a Drupal module here. I didn't lie to you. Here's my Drupal module. Oh, look, I pointed at it. There's my instantiation of the class. Over here, I'm going to symlink. There it is. I'm going to highlight it for you so you can see it. Link.s. That's how you symlink, folks. Okay, I've symlinked that class into the Drupal module. I want to show you that it's there. You can see it, the title validator.php. I think I'm clearing caches. Oh, I'm enabling the module. I should have to do that. Enabling the module I just created. Done. Okay. So now we're running that initial BHAT test again. Remember the one that we wrote in the beginning that was failing? The system test? There it is, the title validator feature. Holy cow, we passed! What up? All right, now I'm going to run the unit test in PHP. So now I'm invoking the, that's not right, Michelle, there it is. I'm running the PHP, the unit test, and you can see that passes. Everything's working. Okay, this gets a little show-offy. I'm really sorry about this, but I'm running more system tests to prove to you that I did what I want. So I'm giving more examples here. This is more examples to prove to you that that I've done my work. Here's all the tests running. Look at all of these scenarios, all of the PHP 5.2. And just to be extra sure, I'm going to show you that this does in fact work. I never even had to go to the browser, but I'm going to show you some examples. You need to use IE6. Nope. We need to use WordPress in weird caps. It doesn't work. Alright, well, how do we name it? Test your shit. Yeah, that's gonna work. Okay. So there we go. We built a title validator using PhpSpec. We just symlinked it into Drupal. Thank you very much, folks. Do that all the time. Okay. All right. So I am a really bad pair programmer. Steve, who's in the room with me, is a really great pair programmer. He is so good at working with someone else to write their code. I won't make anyone else confess how good or bad they are at either having someone teach them code or teaching another person code. I will tell you, I suck at that. I think everyone works really slow on the command line. I immediately feel dumb if someone's helping me. I always screw up. I forget everything I learn. I find it's like writing a poem with another person. We just have our creative minds work differently. We have different inspirations. I feel like I'm becoming the worst of myself when I'm pair programming with another person. I posit that doing behavior-driven development, doing PhpSpec, is like pair programming with yourself and your client's words, right? It's like you're using this really opinionated tool to define what the client wants, and then it's like helping you write the code. And then you write the code, and then you're like, well, what else should I do next? And that question of like, what should I do next? What is the next step? It's kind of there for you. What you do next is define what you're supposed to do. That's what you're supposed to do next. If you don't know what you're going to do next, you describe what the system does. So instead of thinking about like, you know, what hook should I use and should I write a validation, what you should do is describe what you're going to do. That's what you should always be doing. It forces you to come back to saying what it is that you are doing here. What are you trying to accomplish? Which is what a really good pair programmer like Steve does. What are you trying to accomplish?
That was 3 of my slides yesterday. Just the phrase, what are you doing?
What are you... Well, I didn't go to your presentation. I'm really sorry, Steve. It's really awkward. So I'd like to say, if you're antisocial like me, a curmudgeon-y asshole, so good. It's so good to work with PhpSpec. It really is forcing yourself to define very, very explicitly how the system works and to work within the system to build what you need to build. Okay. So, behavior-driven development. I hope I've sold you on it. I'm very charismatic. I could have been, you know, like a Bible thumper, you know, tent revivalist. I hope I sold you on that. But even if I didn't, behavior-driven development within the Drupal space is actually really difficult to do. It's okay to do on a client-to-client basis, but Drupal as a whole is not built from a behavior-driven perspective. It's not defining what it should be doing and then building to make that thing happen. So being a fan of behavior-driven development in the Drupal space feels kind of awkward for me. It feels like this thing that showed up, and it feels like the next step in evolution, but we don't know what to do with it yet. And so what I would like to tell you is something that I have gained from this is just because it's not part of the Drupal space yet doesn't mean it can't be part of your workflow. And when I started to think about that, I became a different kind of developer. So I'm going to make a confession to you. I hate writing Drupal code. I'm so sorry, C++ guy. Welcome to the community. I don't think I'm the only one who feels this way, but I'm finding myself really frustrated to be a Drupal developer these days. I'm so sick of looping through arrays. I'm so sick of figuring out how the Node API works. I'm so sick of not having the kinds of granular tests that I need to make sure that the system works. So I spend so much time trying to understand why my thing didn't trigger when I wanted it to be triggered. I feel like that scene from Dune, you know, when they're calling the desert worm, you know, and I feel so much of what I do as a developer is calling the desert worm and hooking onto the thing and just letting it slide me through the desert and hope that I latched on at the right place to get to where I want to go. It's been really frustrating for me, and recently too. And I know everyone's been saying, well, Drupal 8's coming, and Drupal 8 will be better, and you'll be better. But I think what I'd like to impart from you and what I've taken away is I can be better now. I don't need to wait for Drupal 8. I can make my code work. I can follow best practices. I can find my own way to do things. Just because Drupal 8 isn't come out yet doesn't mean you have an excuse not to do new things and to challenge yourself and be a better developer. And I told you that testing talks get a little preachy, get a little, you know, beratedly. But I'd love to hear what other people are doing. I'd love to hear what risks other people are taking. And I hope that you come away from this with a incitement to write unit tests, whatever it takes. Just whatever you got to do, whatever kind of sim-linking crazy, you know, process that you need to come up with to make yourself better and to get the box that's in the client's head out of their head and into your code. That's what will tell you that you're being a good developer. That's what should guide you. So without no more preachiness, here are some resources. There's a lot of smart people who've written about this. There's not a ton of people who are doing this in the Drupal space yet, but if you get stuck, I'd love to help you or talk to you about it. If you're using if you're coming into mocks, we didn't talk about mocks. If anyone has a question about that, we can talk about it. But I've kept these resources really limited because I hope that you look at all of them. There's a book there. That's kind of hard, but definitely the two at the top. Really check out the documentation. It's interesting. It's an interesting approach to developing. Everett's blog is amazing. I cited several things from that blog. So thank you so much for coming. I'm happy to take questions, hear what other people are doing, other ideas. Go ahead.
So I guess my question was about the mock part. So
okay.
Where in that process, when you tested, you had to go in and submit the form. Mm-hmm. Where in the workflow that you laid out would be setting up tests that would be automated and stuff like that?
Okay. So you started your question by mentioning mocks, but then you asked where in my process would that be automated? Like where would it run? At what point would I run those tests?
Is that part of the definition? Okay.
All right. So where would I put in the mocks? So in my example, I did not mock anything. You saw that when I was using the function get clean or check for clean, I was writing my own titles. So like, let's imagine that these are some examples. So that works really good for a validator, but you know, in Drupal, often a module starts with some node object that you're manipulating, and you want to mock that node object and say like every single function that you're running is looping through or manipulating this node object. That's a lot of what Drupal developers do. So instead of doing it the simple test way, which is bootstrap Drupal to get that example node object, you just mock it. And it can be as simple as just dumping out a node object, adding that as a PHP class. You create a node object called node, and it returns just that thing, and you use that example in your test. So there's something you should look at that's a little bit more complicated. I could give a whole workshop on it, and I'm definitely learning it myself. It's called prophecy. And that's what I had mentioned to Steve, is in units. So what prophecy does is expect something that looks like this. Here's a prophet that's going to foresee this event. This prophet has seen that this will happen, that you will get this node, and then you can proceed writing your test as though that thing has happened. That is in PHP Unit, and it's definitely worth taking a look at. And that's how you can extract your stuff from Drupal. Go ahead.
How is, at a high level, how is PhpSpec different from PHP?
Okay, that's a good question. How's PhpSpec different from PHP unit? The easiest answer is it's behavior driven. So the syntax is different. Go ahead.
Which one is behavior?
PhpSpec. So the syntax it uses is different. The other thing about PhpSpec is it's very opinionated. You notice that it was writing code for me. It can use its own templates. You can tell PhpSpec how you expect the code to look. Wouldn't it be cool if the Drupal core community had their own template for how the code expected to work? It's also self-documenting, so when it fails in a very specific syntax. So when PHP unit test fails, like, this test fails, but when PhpSpec fails, it's, maybe you didn't get a sense looking at this, but it should return swears, expected this, but got that. Go ahead, Steve.
I think about a month ago, you and I were talking about behavior-driven development, and I had a realization of, wait, behavior-driven development is describing the development. It's not necessarily describing the end results. It's not necessarily describing the class. And one way I thought about that is, I'm a theater background. A lot of people will talk about, like, devise plays that groups will write together, and then there are plays that a solo playwright will write alone. Those are descriptions like the way the scripts are written. Looking at the final script, you may not be able to guess, was this written by a solo playwright in isolation? Was this written by a group of people? Anyway, what I'm getting at is, aside from maybe some English verb choice, is there a way to tell if something was written in a behavior-driven manner or in some other manner? And does that even matter if the resulting PHP class is just as good and code coverage is just as good?
Okay.
From the perspective of the class alone, does it matter if it was created in a behavior-driven fashion?
If I was like a code archaeologist, which might be a thing at some point in life, right? And I'm like trying to like, how did they do things back then? Like what I know is, and like what stage of the Iron Age that this plot came from. I don't know. I don't know about that. But the key is the phrase ubiquitous language. Not my choice. Ubiquitous language, which is the language of the client. It should, in fact, describe how things are done in the language of the client. That is really a key difference. There's the test-driven development, which says you should write the test first. Behavior-driven development says, oh, you should write it in the language of the client as the client describes the behaviors to you as much as possible. And you should be describing your test in terms of behaviors as opposed to assert that. You shouldn't be, that's not a helpful test. It should and describe the expected behavior of the test. So I'd like to think that I could tell from the syntax, and I can look at asserts and see if that's a PHP unit test. And it should, I know that's a behavior test. Whether or not there's been that communication with the client to make sure that there's the language of the expected behavior built in, I wouldn't know that. So it's like agile, right? Like you can be agile-ish, and you can be behavior-driven development-ish.
I guess what I'm wondering is behavioral actually describing the test, or is it describing the way you write the test?
I'm not sure if we're totally understanding each other here. I think maybe the distinction that we're having here is that behavior-driven development test should mean that you should be thinking about implementing behaviors on the site. So your question, when you don't know what more code to write, when you have that moment, what should I do now? The thing that behavior-driven development tests should tell you to do is describe a behavior. Describe what's supposed to happen. A test-driven development doesn't necessarily guide you that way. if test-driven development tells you, well, you should write a test, behavior-driven development says you should describe what you're supposed to be doing. What are you doing?
And I think what I'm saying is behavioral testing sounds just like getting more specific about test-driven development.
Yes.
It's like, I'm not hearing an argument against test-driven development.
Oh.
What I'm hearing is we need to be more specific.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So under if this was an umbrella of test-driven development,
Yeah.
behavior-driven development is firmly underneath that umbrella.
Okay.
In fact, a lot of people have said behavior-driven development was what test-driven development, just a refinement, just a clarity. It's just a little bit more specific than test-driven development.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not TDD or BDD. BDD is just a little bit more specific.
Okay.
Any other questions?
I have a question.
Yes, Kathy.
When you were saying that you can be better now, and you don't have to wait for Drupal 8, you gave some examples or elaborated on that. Can you just say a little bit more? What did you mean?
Okay. So, for instance, Composer. Composer is going to be there in Drupal 8. Isn't that going to be fun? Are we all looking forward to using Composer? Why aren't you using it now? There's no reason not to use it now. So wouldn't that be fun to have namespacing and write classes? And it'll be so much easier to write unit testing in Drupal 8. Aren't we all looking forward to doing that? Well, why don't you do it now? I mean these sorts of things. I know that things will be easier in Drupal 8. I know that there's a lot that we're looking forward to with Drupal 8. But that doesn't mean that it's okay not to do those things now, even though it's not the Drupal 7 way. And we were talking at lunch today. This not the Drupal way is becoming just not the Drupal 7 way, right? What we think of as the Drupal way is now Drupal 7, and we're all looking forward to not doing it the Drupal way. Every one of us is. That's why we're all excited about Drupal 8, except people who love writing for each loops. Those people, I mean, they'll still be able to have their fun with render arrays and stuff. So, but we should find ways to do all that fun stuff that we're looking forward to right now. There's really no reason to wait.
Why do you think people aren't doing that already? Like, why do you have to? Why should anybody have to encourage this behavior? What's stopping people from just naturally doing that?
So this is my opinion, and just because I'm standing here presenting doesn't mean that you should trust me, but you totally should. I think that there's a fear, and I definitely had it, like going outside the Drupal community, doing something that's not documented, doing something that's not the Drupal way. Where does this class come from? Well, this uses Symfony standards. It doesn't use the Drupal coding standards, and my code fails it, falls over. I'm not using the right syntax. So a lot of the things that have been used to keep Drupal together, I'm not following. I use Composer and symlink a Drupal root together from vendor. I use PhpSpec and symlink my classes into the Drupal. So that does feel scary to try something new. It does. I have my moments where I'm like, I'm working for clients. I want to build them the best thing, and the easiest thing to do is do what has been tried and true, and where I'm going to get Drupal support, right? Where I'm going to be able to go and ask someone for help, and know that I'm going to be told the Drupal way, and pass the Acquia test if that's what I have to take. But I'm not going to pass it this way, right? It does feel scary to try something new, at least for me. It felt like I don't know if this is the right thing, but writing more unit tests is the right thing, and being able to control my code and being able to make explicit what my requirements are, it is the right thing. And the Drupal community knows it's the right thing because they put it in Drupal 8. So it's not a secret that that's the right thing to do, but we should be doing it now. And it is a little bit unorthodox, but I'm trying to encourage people to take chances. And you'll support me on the issue queue, right? Did you have a question?
Yeah, so I'm totally new to this
Bahat, if you want to say Tarjay fanciness.
Don't. Just say BHAT.
It's a bee and a hat, right? Like,
Yes.
there couldn't be more. I'm so sorry. You stuck a chord. Go ahead.
So I'm trying to figure out where so you have the natural language thing that you put up as your first thing in the command line. I guess this is where that's natural language stuff. And at some point you were running an automated test that was it directly based on the natural language stuff? Like, did you find a bunch of things in terms of when I say cannot have, that means, check the string for equality, and that's how it managed to make an automated test?
Okay, so your question is very BHAT driven, and I remember the first time I saw a BHAT test, I did not realize it's executable. I didn't realize that natural language, given I fill in title with this, was executing. So let me make that clear. Every single line that I'm calling acceptance criteria. So everything given, then, given when, then. And anything in quotes are arguments. So imagine that line, given I fill in title with IE6, that executes to a function that takes the parameters title and IE6, and it goes onto the DOM, goes onto the page. So it's running a crawler, a system test, right? It says open up a browser, or it's made an HTTP request. It's taken the DOM, it's found a field called title, and it's inserted the text IE6 into that field. It's actually executing, every single one of those lines actually executes against a title. And you can't see it in my code, but you can very faintly, when it runs, see what function just ran against that natural language.
So is all of the actual code doing that something you end up writing for every contest you write, or is there a specific language that you have to be using to write that?
Okay, yeah, there is a syntax. There's a quick start, which is there's a extension called Drupal extension. It looks like a Drupal module, but it's not. You download it from Composer, and that's kind of a good starter kit. Someone has already gone through the work of explaining some of these definitions for you, but eventually, and it won't take you long, you'll write your own definitions, because there's no way, I mean, it's testing, you should be writing your own definition, but it's a really good way to start the Drupal extension for BHAT. And again, system test is the lowest hanging fruit. How are we doing, Terry? All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. I don't think I have more time. Thank you.